Hey, what's up guys? Guardian here, coming to you guys with a deck profile today on my updated Hexaorb deck. So it's been a while since I profiled this deck on the channel. I think set 3 was the last time I did a profile for it. And yeah, most of the support that Hexaorb got came out of set 4. I know that I did mention in the box opening that I was going to do an update for this deck, but just never got around to it, never really fancied it until recently. So yeah, set 5 came out recently, and I also think the festival collection came out recently as well. So that is the current timeline where we're at the minute. So yeah, we're waiting for set 6 to come out in English. I know that Japan's getting it soon, and there's also a bit of Hexorb support in that set, I think. So we will update the deck when set 6 comes around, since I can probably see myself sticking with the Hexorb deck more so than Bastion probably. So we'll see what happens, but yeah, today we have an updated Hexaorb deck, so let's get into the deck profile. So first we have the starter, of course, with the Hexaorb Sorceress, just the typical Hexaorb starter. And then the grade 1 is going to be, of course, the T-Square Sorceress. When you ride on her with your Pentagleam, you can counterblast to draw a card. Very simple. And then we, of course, have the Pentagleam, which we need to ride into, which is basically when you ride your Hexaorb on her, you can rearrange the top 3 cards of your deck. So it really helps you with, seeing what's coming up, see if there's any triggers there, and if you need to do any deck manipulation. So, of course, we need the Hexaorb Sorceress for our grade 3, and her skills is that whenever you drive check a trigger, you can give one of your reguards 10k, and this is not a once per turn, so you can do that as many times as you get a trigger. And then the second skill is if you Persona Road, you can Counterblast and Soul Blast, and you can put a crit or a front on the top of your deck, and she gets drive +1 until end of turn. Now do note that it's not a mandatory effect to put a trigger on top, but if you do want to guarantee the trigger effect, just so that you can get that trigger effect and also the 10k from Hexorb skill, you can do that, but otherwise you will get that guaranteed triple drive for the turn, which is still pretty good. So yeah, that is the right deck. And then to go into main deck here, we of course have the 3 additional copies of Hexorb, just because we do need to be Persona riding in this deck, so that is pretty self-explanatory right there. And then of course, next for the next grade 3, we have 3 copies of Fasado. I decided to keep this in the deck just because I wanted some sort of reliability in the deck to countercharge in some aspect. I know that there's some other options that Hexorb have, but I feel like Fasado, being a 13k beat stick, and then getting like the 10k power increments from the Hexorb, it gives us a good chance to have another attacker that can hit good numbers, but also he can then give us a countercharge towards the end of the turn, so that we can have a follow-up counterblast for our next turn, which we do need for the Hexorb skill anyway. So yeah. Also, Fasado, being a grade 3, can actually enable us in twin drive plays if we get the over trigger, and also having that resist skill can actually come in handy against any control matchups. So I quite like Fasad. You can cut him if you want to, but I quite like him as a reliability factor to get some resources back, since we have a couple of cards in the deck that do both cost Counterblast and Soul Blast other than Hexorb. So yeah, I quite like the Facade. And then next for the grade 2s, we are playing the 4 copies of Alwyn. Good old Alwyn is one of our better stackers in the deck, so when placed, if your Vanguard's Hexorb, you can Soul Blast and then look at the top 2 of your deck, and you basically get to rearrange them to either the top or the bottom. So yeah, pretty good stacking effect. And then the second skill is that if you reveal a trigger, during the drive check, you can Counterblast and give it 10,000 power. Now, this skill actually does come up sometimes when it comes towards the later stages of the game. If you have a good amount of open CB, you can just make your all-wins really, really big. And I do play a lot of crits in this deck, so you can actually close games out just by having a really massive rearguard and then, stacking a crit in it, right? So yeah, all-win, really, really good stacking effect on that card. And then next for the grade 2s, we're playing the 4 copies of Kakaron. So she came out with set 3. Honestly, Kakaron, I don't like using the effect too often, but she is pretty good to enable some sort of a grade 2 rush turn, just because she can be a pretty nice attacker to poke with, and then you can also have a way to stack the deck in some way. But what I do like her for is her defensive aspect, which is she gets 5k shield and 2k power as long as your Vanguard is Hexaorb Sorceress. So when you go into the grade 3 turn, you will have the 10k shield available from your Kakaron, which is pretty good. But sometimes the stacking effects in this can actually help your grade 2 turn be a little bit more potent, which is quite nice. But I don't like using it too often, but it is there if you need it. And then for the next grade 2, this one I actually quite like, quite a lot actually. It's 4 copies of the Esunono. So this is a common card that came out of set 4, and it's pretty cool. So when it attacks, if your Vanguard's Hexaorb or Pentagleam, you can pay the cost of discarding a card from your hand, and then you basically do the effect of your all-win. So you can look at top 2 and rearrange it to the top or the bottom. But in addition, the Esunono also gets 10k power until end of turn. And this is actually really cool with one of the new support pieces that we got from set 4 as well, being the Lalarita, because she's able to restand one of your rearguards when using a trigger. So you can use that in combination with the Esunono, and then because she keeps the 10k that she got from her skill, you'll be able to attack with her with that 20k baseline on top of any other power increments that you get from either Hexaorb or trigger effects. So yeah, and then also having a really good stacking effect in similar line to Olwen is also really nice. I was afraid that the discard outlet part of it was going to be a little bit harsh on the deck, but it does seem to be okay. It's not too detrimental to the deck in terms of keeping card advantage going, but it does get you there in the long run and can actually be a pretty potent card, especially on the turn 2, since you can use this when you're on your turn 2 turn. So yeah. Okay, and that's it for the grade 2s. So going into the grade 1s, of course, we have the 4 copies of the Perfect Guard, just the staple Perfect Guard of the nation, obviously, so 4 copies of that. And then we are playing the 4 copies of Torturous. So I actually decided to bump Torturous up to 4. I think on my last update, I was either doing 2 or 3. I can't really remember. But one of the main reasons to have 4 in the deck is that it gives the deck far more consistency to make sure that you have an Hexaorb by the time you get to your grade 3 turn. Because you want to be going into your turn 4 with a guaranteed Hexaorb Persona ride so that you can then start rolling the ball and getting her skill going. And Torturous is basically the best way to do this. Now, the good thing with this is that it's quite flexible in that if you already have the Hexaorb in your hand, ready for the turn 4, you could use this for like whatever you want at that point. You can use it for discard fodder for the right deck. You can call it down early to maybe have an early game booster or attacker. So yeah, it's quite flexible as a 4 of, just in terms of consistency, but also having a additional booster in the deck outside of the Lalarita. So yeah, I quite like the 4 copies, so sticking with the 4. And then for the last grade 1, we have the new support card, which came out from set 4, being the 4 copies of Lalarita. So she's pretty costly, but she's not too bad in terms of giving the deck an enabler to do an extra attack. So at the end of the battle that your drive check revealed a trigger unit, if your Vanguard's Hexaorb, you can Counterblast and Soul Blast, choose one of your other rearguards and stand it, and then you retire this unit. So yeah, it basically allows you to restand basically a massive rearguard. Because let's be honest, when you're getting triggers and also extra power through the Hexaorb effect, those rearguards are going to be quite sizable. So being able to restand them and then pressuring them with critical triggers is going to be pretty detrimental to then sealing the game off and going for lethal. So yeah, even though it is quite harsh in terms of the Counterblast and Soul Blast cost and retiring it, so you do have to take a minus as well. I feel like that the skill is good enough to at least be an enabler to pressure the opponent and go for game. And it has came in quite clutch as of recently. So yeah. I do feel like this card was pretty much designed in the aspect of using it with Esunono. So I would actually play this card with this if you want to combine them two together. But I think in general it is a good support piece. It does give the deck to basically get a 4th attack off if you got the field set up. So yeah, so 4 copies of Lalarita, and it's also another booster as well. One other element of this deck that I like is the fact that we do have access to 2 pretty good grade 1s, but we can also just use these in the element of using them as a booster, just so that we can boost our Hexaorb Sorceress sometimes, and then pressure them with, stacking the deck, saying that, if they don't PG the Hexaorb attack, we could actually give the power increase from Hexaorb's effect to the rearguard that's boosting her, so that we can actually give them to the grade 1s to get over different power shield thresholds that the opponent might guard with. So it makes the Vanguard swing a bit more scary when you've got a booster behind it. So yeah, so having the extra boosters in the deck is pretty nice overall. And then lastly, we have the triggers. So of course, in a Hexaorb deck, we would be pretty stupid if we didn't play the Over trigger in the deck that cares a lot about its drive checks. So of course, we're playing the Amata Noah. And then for the other triggers, we're playing 4 copies of Feather Dragon, and then 3 copies of Disma. I do feel like a critical build is much more prominent, especially when you're restanding a reguard. I was experimenting with fronts, but the times that front triggers came up aggressively, I felt like a critical could just do a better job at closing games out. It is nice to have the defensive aspect of a front, but I feel like in this deck, it really just wants to push as hard as it can to seal games off as quick as it can, since the deck overall is quite slow and is a turn 4 deck after all. So yeah, so the 7 critical is what I went for. And obviously, as you can imagine, since I didn't go for 8 crit, I am indeed doing the 4 draw trigger, just so that we have more draw power, more hand consistency. Since we do have the Esu-no-no discarding cards for effect, I wanted to make sure we had those draws to replenish our hand, and also have more outlets to draw into Hexaorb Sorceress more consistently. So yeah, so 4 copies of those. And then last but not least, we have our heal triggers, which I guess in relation to the festival collection coming out recently, we did get this new heal trigger, which basically, if your opponent's unit has an additional crit on it that came from a non-trigger effect, so basically its own skill, this gets an extra 15k shield. So along with the multi-attack heal trigger, where if the unit is attacked more than once, these basically have ways to get extra shield value, basically making them 25k shields, which can come up every now and then, but I decided to go for a 1-on-1 split in these just because they don't come up too often. So if you wanted to swap these out for the base heal trigger with the Circling Sorceress, you can do that, but I thought for just for a little bit of flexibility, I thought I'd put one of each of the new heal triggers from set 5 and the festival collection in, respectively. So yeah, so 4 copies of the heals, and yeah, that is it for the deck. So this is Hexaorb Sorceress. Like I said, it's been quite a while since I've updated this deck, but the deck overall is quite nice. I don't think it's too expensive. I can't think of any major outliers that could be a problem, but yeah, I do think I'll be continuing with this deck in terms of upgrading it over time when more support comes out. I'm still a little bit iffy in terms of what I'm going to be doing with future sets when new stuff comes out. I might just primarily be focusing on updating my older decks, since, you know, building around the new ride line all the time can get a little bit too much, and yeah, having like 7 different decks in Keta Sanctuary maybe could be a bit too much for me to handle in terms of like play testing with them and deck building with them like all the time. But at least I got the deck choice if necessary, but I feel like what I have in my arsenal at the minute is quite nice anyway to play around with. So yeah, that's going to do it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed the deck profile, and I will catch you guys in the next video. So like always, this is Guardian 25, signing out.